Welcome everybody to Sports Quotes and Facts Untold. Today I'm joined by Aaron Berry, who, if you're a football fan of a certain age, you might actually remember his name because he lived a dream of many football fans. To be honest, he earned his club the money to make a signing. This was back in 2005. It was a competition with Coca Cola, and the championship was sort of rebranded from the first division. Coca Cola was the sponsor, and it ran a pretty cool competition for a football fan to win £250,000 for their club. And it was Aaron, who's a Brighton fan, who won that money. And Brighton went on to sign Colin Kazim-Richards, gone on to have a very good career at home and abroad. He's played in the Premier League, he's played in Turkey. But Aaron, obviously, you won that prize back in 2005 now. What are your sort of memories of the competition win, and where were Brighton at that time? How important was that win for the club?
Thanks, Elliot. Yeah, I think it was really important for the club at the time. We were hard up. Um, we were sort of relying on handouts from unknown people at the time, and I think evidently that proved to be people like Norman Cook, Fatboy Slim, and Tony Bloom. But we didn't realise they were putting money in the club at the time just to keep them going. Our current chairman at the time, Dick Knight, did an amazing job in keeping us going when we left the Goldstone ground. So we'd had a bit of a nomadic existence, and I think it had been probably good 2 years since we'd actually paid any money for anybody. We were just relying on free transfers, players coming towards the end of their career and just coming to us for a few months contract. We did quite well, and we had that bit of spirit where everything was against us, and that sort of got us through to a large degree. There wasn't really that many years when we were really struggling on the pitch. We just sort of ticked over more than anything else at around the time when we won the Coca Cola competition. But yeah, it was such a boost. And my first thought when I found out that I'd won was, this is absolutely amazing. We got up to £250,000, which is nothing in football transfer fees today, as we know, to buy on one player. And actually, the rules at the time were it doesn't matter actually how many players you buy, as long as you don't exceed that amount of money. And also, they said some of that money could go towards ground improvements, which we weren't probably really going to do it with Dean, because I don't know how you could have improved with Dean at all, other than perhaps knocking it down and starting it again. But it was our home for a while. Yeah, just the thought that as a fan, I was able, by pure fluke, to actually help that situation by getting a player. And I was hoping at the time that, okay, let's hope we spend it on one really decent player. The previous season, our top scorer had been Adam Virgo. I think he got about 7 or 8 goals. But he was a defender by nature. He'd been right back, I think, the season before. And Mark McGee, the manager at the time, had tried him up front just as a punt, just to see if we can have a different sort of way of surviving the division, which we did that season. But I think everyone was desperate for us to go out and get someone who could score more than 7 or 8 goals in a season. So yeah, when we found out that we won, I was just made up that I was going to be able to contribute towards hopefully a bit more success in the near future.
Yeah, and just a bit more background for maybe the younger fans. Brighton were in an FA Cup final in the '80s. Then in the '90s, they were sort of in the Football League.
Yeah.
They nearly went out of the Football League. And as time went on, they were sort of around the Championship League One. And if you can just explain as well that the with Dean, it was basically an athletic track.
It was.
What you
I
would
mean,
The way you'd compare the seating was almost like when you watch the golf open, the sort
that's
of
what it,
scaffolding seats. That's what it
that's
was, and that
exactly
was
what it
Brighton's
was.
home ground. Yeah,
It was. I mean, yeah. I mean, the first football match I can recall as a child was the '83 Cup final, and I would have been 7 at the time. My dad wasn't really into football, but my grandparents were, so they sort of got me into it a bit more, and I started following Brighton properly when I was 9 or 10 years old. But yeah, we left the Goldstone, which has been documented many times in terms of poor ownership, etc. Went to Gillingham for a couple of years and just about survived on 2,000 crowds. But yes, going to Withdean, it was literally the open golf in Scotland where they have the main stand, which you see on the final day, the final holes. That was that stand for the Withdean South Stand. It was sort of taken apart every end of May, shipped up to Scotland for July, and then we got it back again in August. And every year, the chief exec at the time at the Albion, a chap called Martin Perry, who equally played a huge part in helping the club, would always worry that we have the safety permit come through because it was literally bolted together the week before the season started. So yeah, it was an athletics track. We used to call it the theatre of trees just to make it sound a bit better than it actually was.
So to put that in context of the where Brighton were at the point and that money, what was the club's reaction like? Did you get to speak to people at the club after the competition win?
Yeah, it was strange because I won. I come back from holiday the day before from America. Now I was a little bit jet lagged actually, and I woke up in the morning having missed a couple of calls. So I was really lucky to actually just think, okay, I'm going to take this call. Told and I was sworn to secrecy. I wasn't able to tell anybody until the day where it was going to be announced, which was the following Monday. It was a bank holiday weekend, and they were going to announce it live on the playoff final. So much so that when I got to the Millennium Stadium to watch the games, that was part of the prize as well. You can go to watch the final there. I was in the hotel just beforehand, and Mark McGee and Dick Knight came into this hotel restaurant, and I went to go up because I thought, oh, I need to go. Look what we've done. And the guy who looked after me, a guy called Chris Ross, who ironically was a Crystal Palace fan, as people will know, they're our main rivals, but he was tasked with chaperoning me for the day. He was gutted. He said, no. Even Mark McGee doesn't know it yet. When we get to the stadium, we're going to have a announcement there. And it literally wasn't until we got until the tunnel when obviously someone had then told Mark, and he literally legged up the tunnel towards me. And it was such a surreal feeling. I'd known the name Mark McGee for 20 odd years before he became a Brighton manager. And now he's running up to me and saying, oh, you must be Aaron. Well done. And then Chris Kamara came up and did exactly the same. These are like legends in my eyes, and they know my name. It was very, very odd. And literally, as I was walking down the tunnel, the Preston and West Ham players who were about to play the playoff final were sort of coming back in from their warm-up. I thought, why am I here? This is really, really strange.
Yeah, so it wasn't just the money that you won, it was just that experience as well. As I said at the start of the podcast, that you've lived the dream. I'm sure that every fan of every club, especially clubs where they are struggling, to help them in that way is just massive. So when the competition was announced and the club found out, obviously the player final would have been in the May.
Yes.
What was the process like, and how much were you kept in the loop in terms of where the money was going, or were you only told when the signing was made?
So on the day of the final, Dick Knight sort of dropped a hint to me that there's a player we want in the division below who's like raw talent. He is a striker, so I was pleased about that. And Coca Cola, funny enough, was saying to me, we want you involved in the decision making whether we who Brighton should sign. I said no, they're never going to ask me who we should sign. So I said at the time, look, I trust the club to go out and get the player that they think's right for them and everything. And then from that point of view, I didn't hear from the club for probably about 3 weeks. I was still quite involved in it because it wasn't like that was the day and that was it. Coca Cola assigned me a PR person a PA, should I say, to come and make sure I was doing radio interviews, TV interviews, keep it going. They had a really big promotion over it, and they wanted to just sort of make the most of it as they possibly could. And then I got a phone call out of the blue saying, right, we're signing the player tomorrow. Can you come to Withdean so we can do the sort of unveiling? And they said, it's this guy called Colin Kazim-Richards. I have to be honest, I've never heard of him because he was only 18 at the time, played for Bury. So I obviously got home and look on YouTube. And he had, I think, won their Young Player of the Season award or something like that. And had a penchant for scoring spectacular goals. I thought, this is absolutely perfect. So next day, went to Withdean, loads of press there. Yeah, he was really, really chuffed. I think he was desperate to be able to prove himself at a high level. I mean, as we've seen from he's had a remarkable career. And I'd imagine there's a lot of footballers who obviously want to keep bettering themselves all the time. He was so pleased that he just got this opportunity to even step up one division. And he was friendly, nice to speak to. As it happens, I don't recall I ever spoke to him again after that day. I didn't need to, he's there to do a job. But even that was quite thrilling to know I've been involved in signing this person who was hopefully going to, give us a glorious season. Didn't turn out that way. We got relegated. But you just never know in football. It didn't matter. I think the experience of just knowing I was well involved in that was just something I couldn't have imagined ever happening. It was a really good idea that Coke came up with, and I loved every minute of it. Even looking back at the end when we sold him, it went a bit sort of wrong in terms of how he sort of fell out with people at the club. He moved on, but that's football. That happens now with bigger players than he's ever been. It is just the way it goes. But the thing that I still keep clinging on to is I got told the day that we sold him to Sheffield United, Dick Knight phoned me up. It was quite late. It's about 10:30 at night. And he said, out of courtesy, I want to tell you why we sold him. And to this day, I don't think I've ever told anybody why. And I won't, because it was a confidential thing. But they were, the reasons were fine, acceptable. He didn't have to let me know, but it was good of him to do so. But we didn't really sign anybody for any money for about another year after that. But we actually made a profit on what we paid for him. And the next person we signed for any decent amount of money was Glenn Murray, who went on to become an absolute legend for us. So I'm taking partial credit for indirectly getting Glenn Murray to the club in the first place.
Yeah, because that was one of my questions really. That I've read that although Colin Kazim-Richards wasn't a huge success, that the money that you pumped into the football club, came out again and was spent on a player that scored over 100 goals for Brighton and is a big
Exactly.
part of the Brighton story of where they are now.
Absolutely. I mean, Glenn was fabulous in both spells. We were all gutted that he left the Palace for whatever reasons they were. But he came back, and if anything, he did more for his second time around than he did first time around. So from that point of view, it was a clever bit of work from the club at the time we got regards Collins. Actually, it turned out they got the 250,000 from Coke for the buying of a player, but he actually only cost 55,000 originally. And the other elements of it went on wages, and they might have actually put a bit of money towards stadium redevelopment, but they had a sell-on clause. I think they sold him to Sheffield United for about 225,000. And then when he went on to Fenerbahce after that, we got another 225,000. So effectively, the win was more like 500,000 in the end, and we paid 300 and something thousand for Glenn Murray. So it all worked out quite well in the end. Colin had a remarkable career. He's seen the world more than a lot of other players have, and we ended up with Glenn Murray. So it's a happy story all around.
Yeah, and obviously just going back to when he first arrived, in 2023, social media is a big thing. You can read criticism within a few clicks. Back then, there was still, forums, there would still be newspaper articles criticising managers. When Kazim-Richards first walked onto the pitch, and then as the season unfolded, did you feel pressure, even though it wasn't your signing?
Absolutely. I went to the first game of the season. I mean, I've got a young family at the time. I didn't do a huge amount of away games. I've been a season ticket holder since I was 15 years old, I think, something like that. And I've literally just racked up my 801st game, so I'm doing all right. But at the time, I was so excited that he went 4 or 5 games without scoring. I thought, okay, and Brighton hadn't started the season well. When he did score, the relief was absolutely immense. It was quite pressured, and it's fair to say I wouldn't have changed anything for the world because it was a wonderful experience. But when he left, there was also a relief because actually I wasn't going to be blamed for it anymore. Because unfortunately, football fans they're quick to really enjoy the highs and everyone's the world's greatest team, greatest player. But when things start going a bit wrong, and Colin had a spell where things weren't going his way, he wasn't being picked, wasn't scoring. There was some silliness in terms of people saying, "Well, I never should have signed him. I never should have signed him in the first place," which is absolutely ridiculous. No, it's nothing to do with me, but. It was a bit odd. And I think by the time we got to the end of the season, and I think he left, 2 or 3 games into the start of the following season, whilst I'd enjoyed the whole experience, I could then just get back to being a normal fan, if you like. I was always a normal fan, but you did have people sort of notice you a bit more. I don't think anyone notices me now. That's the look in the book. So I've aged a bit. I've lost some hair since then.
Well, as you say, he did go on to have a really good career. Even though he didn't set the world alight at Brighton, he played in the Premier League. Very shortly after with Sheffield United. He's played at Derby more recently. He's been a really solid player in the Championship, I'd say, and that move abroad to Turkey where he scored gold and he's played internationally as well. So
Yeah.
not that you feel justified as such, but were you pleased for him as well? Because you'd met him at such a young age and he was so appreciative of the opportunity. That must have filled you with a certain sense of pride that the player had gone on to fulfill his potential.
Absolutely. I think, overall, I'm pleased that I played a tiny part at the start of someone's career that he's gone on and he's been really successful. He's been around lots of different clubs. He's played for two different clubs in Brazil as well. He came back to England, you say, and did quite well with Blackburn. He's not viewed particularly well by Brighton fans for various reasons. But, at least I can say it was an event in Brighton's history. I look at it from the bigger picture point of view and that it helped us. And actually, I played a little part in him having a really good career at the start of his career because he might well have been picked up by another club at the time and might have had a similar sort of situation. But I think the exposure that he got at the time probably did help his career. I'm not sure as time went on how much he enjoyed the Coca Cola Kid tag as he got older. At the time when we arrived, I think he was lapping it up.
Yeah, I guess as well. You said that he was very appreciative on the day, and I know that you haven't spoke to him since then. You've just said, but there was an opportunity to actually go and see him play abroad. I understand, so there was that appreciation there.
Yeah, his dad kept in contact with me for quite a few years afterwards. So when Colin went off and played abroad, I think there was a season where whether it was Fenerbahce or someone played Arsenal in a Europe Champions League match or UEFA match, I can't remember. And they sent me the signed shirt from one of those games, 2 or 3 signed shirts actually from the period. And he said, we will always be grateful for what you did, even though it's purely by accident in getting Colin on the map. And they said, we'll fly you out for a game in Turkey. And just my personal life circumstances, didn't make it particularly easy at the time. I don't regret not going, but it was kind of his dad to sort of keep in contact along the way and just say, we are still grateful. We're not forgetting you. But it was nice to have the offer from them, certainly.
And so that was sort of the mid 2000s. Now that Colin Kazim-Richards left, so how were the next few years for Brighton at the Withdean? With the more difficult years, what was that like being a fan?
Yeah, it was. I think we were so desperate to have a permanent home. We knew Withdean would never be the place, but I don't think any of us thought we'd be at Withdean over 10 years when we first went there. I think the hope was, we'll get a new stadium sorted. We're playing here 4 or 5 years maximum. And then we had the credit crisis in the country, which knocked everything back, and the cost of the stadium quadrupled and maybe even more than that. And it did get to the point where thinking, is this ever going to happen? We had the planning permission approved, and then it got taken away because there was an error for the people who put the permission together because there's a boundary issue. So when it finally came, it was thought, great, we're going to do it. We're going to have this fantastic new stadium. And then because the costs have gone up, we thought, well, actually, is it ever going to be built now? Thankfully, we had Tony Bloom, whose family are ingrained in the club. Dick Knight saved the club from its existence, and Tony Bloom then took it that next stage further and secured its everlasting future, hopefully. So it was hard those, apart from the last year with Dean, where we won the league and got into the championship now. It was a bit of a struggle to think, are we always going to be here now? Are we actually ever going to get out of this? And the fans played so much of a part in terms of campaigns. People, when I won the competition, people were saying, "Oh, what you've done for the club is amazing." It really is nothing compared to some of the other fans which have helped the club. The Paul Samrars of this world, who's a fairly well-known chap in the Brighton area from what he's done, but that's just one person. There's so many. And I think the relief when we finally started seeing the ground being built, which is on my route to work every day, was like, we are actually going to go places. There's no guarantee you're going to be successful when you have a new stadium. I remember when Millwall went into the new Den, and we thought, okay, Millwall's on their way back, and they haven't still got to the Premier League since then, and maybe one day they will, and good luck to them. Good chance, this season. But it was no guarantee. But I think the way that the structure, the ethos of the club has been since Tony took the reins, and brought in Paul Barber. It's commonly said in the press how well the club is run, and we feel it all the time. We are very lucky. They've taken us to the point now where we are witnessing the greatest period in the club's history. Older fans of me will say, well, yeah, we had the original period in the first division where we got to the cup final. Yeah, that was obviously fantastic. And we had good spells otherwise. In the mid-60s, when Brian Clough came, we weren't particularly great, but he sort of set the ball rolling and put us on the map a little bit. But there has been nothing that compares to what we're going through now. And that really stems from Dick Knighton originally, and now Tony Bloom going forwards. It's a world of difference compared to getting rained on every week with Dean. Even now, it still feels sometimes like the Amex is an away match because we were in such poor surroundings for so long. It's like we're going to a really amazing stadium as a one-off, but that's stupid because we've been there for more than 10 years now. But it's flying by.
Yeah, and then for me as a general football fan looking from the outside, all of a sudden, I was well aware of the struggles that Brighton had, but it's been well documented this season that Brighton are a club that do things right. They've got a real plan. But even then, at the start of that championship journey, you had, sort of players like Gordon Greer who were there at the back. And then there was that Spanish inclusion as well of sort of player of the standing of Vicente, who struggles at the with Dean. He was playing in the Champions League with Valencia. So as that momentum gained, did you feel like one day we can't, as you've just mentioned about Millwall, did it feel like we're on an upward trajectory, or did it all feel a bit too surreal?
I think it did feel like an upward trajectory, and I think that's been the genius in how Tony Bloom and Paul Barber have run it. They've not got too far ahead of themselves, and there's been pressure from the fans saying, well, we're not going to get anywhere or stay in the division, particularly the Premier League, unless we spend money. But they're very clever as to how they spend that money, how they've invested it. Tony has obviously built the training ground as well, which has now been rated as one of the best training grounds in Europe, the Elite Performance Centre, as it's called. So it's been a slow, steady progression. Fans are impatient. You know what it's like. We want to be successful straight away, but actually we've just been on a slow burner to get to this point. And you're right, it did build. It built as soon as Tony came in. There's no disrespect to Dick Knight because he was incredible. But I think Tony just had a slightly different vision as to how he wanted to do it. And with your players like Gordon Greers, and then we moved on to, obviously, Glenn Murray was there, and Ashley Barnes did a tremendous job for us too. When Vicente came, wow, I mean, at that time, I'd never seen a better player on the pitch for a live match that I've been to, other than Paul Gascoigne. I saw him at his peak a few times. Vicente looked like he went to bed at night with the football. He was amazing. He scored the best goal that never was in one game against Derby, actually. We took it around 3 or 4 players, walked through and had this shot, and it unfortunately hit the bar. But I don't think I would have seen a better goal in the rest of my life if that had gone in. So I think that little step up each time. And then when Chris Hughton came in and took us to the Premier League, was amazing with football there. We had Anthony Knockhart, who again was a tremendous player in a good team. And then when we survived the first couple of seasons, there was, I think, a bit of a worry that, is this all we're going to be in the Premier League for, just to survive? And we didn't. Tony said he didn't want us to be a yo-yo club. He wanted us to stay in there for as long as we possibly could. And he was aiming for, let's make sure we're in here 10 years plus. And at the time, I thought, well, I'll be well chuffed if we just get one season in the Premier League. And as it turned out, they had a change of direction. Brought in Graham Potter, who set the foundations for what Roberto De Zerbi has taken even higher in the last 8 or 9 months.
Yeah, so I was going to ask, that was going to be my next question. From again, looking from afar, it seemed that Graham Potter was just the right fit at that time. He was a progressive young coach, and it just seemed to really fit in with what Brighton were doing. Did he really revolutionise it and take it up a level?
I think he did, because it was such a different style to Chris Hughton, and Chris Hughton will always, he'll never have to buy a drink in Brighton, Chris Hughton, because he did so much for us. An honourable, decent chap. But we wanted, as a club, or Tony wanted as a club, to change the style of the football in play. Chris's remit was probably to keep us up, and he did that. Thanks very much. Brought Graham in. And it was a risk because, he was certainly untried at that level. Albeit came with the potential for being really, really good. Cram was a very slow burner as well. At times, we looked absolutely stunning under him. But there were more times where we looked really good but couldn't score for Toffee. And there were spells where we went a long time without a win at all. I think we went probably a calendar year without a win at home. Lucky for him during COVID. So there weren't many fans around to see it. And I do wonder if we had crowds in, whether he would have survived that. But the club, fair play, stuck with him. And the last 6 months he was with us. So the last perhaps 3 months of the previous season and the first 3 months, including pre-season of the season we're in currently, it seemed to gel, and we started putting in some incredible performances. Back in last season, we beat Man United and West Ham, Arsenal and Spurs, and then the start of this year, we were going on the same sort of trajectory. And then he left. Now, personally, I'd say, yeah, I was always grateful for what Graham did. He absolutely laid the foundations. I wouldn't want to criticise him in any way, but I would say that perhaps Plan B and Plan C weren't often seen. And that's because he had a determined view as to how he wanted us to play, which is absolutely fine. When Roberto De Zerbi came in, who I have to say didn't really know much about, clearly he was someone in the same sort of build, and the club have that sort of process where they know who the next person's going to be. They probably know who they want as a successor to De Zerbi when he goes, hopefully not for a very long time. But he came in, and the difference between him and Graham Potter, I feel like I can sum up by saying that if we were 1-0 up under Potter, Potter would have brought on a defensive midfielder or a defender and we'll shore up, which is a bit like what Chris Hughton did in those circumstances. De Zerbi brings on a striker. He'll say, no, I'm not settling for one goal. I want to score another couple. That's the main difference, because the style of play is actually not too dissimilar. It's just a bit more gung-ho, a bit more attacking. It feels a bit like the sort of Kevin Keegan side of Newcastle in the mid-90s, where they just went for it. And sometimes they'd ship 3 goals, but they might score 4. And we've had a few games like that against your chaps, when we lost 5-1 the other week. I'm a bit surprised we haven't had that happen to us a bit more often, because there is the risk in how we play out from the back.
Yep.
And Sean Dyche is very clever, so he knows exactly what he's doing. So that's how he managed to get one over us there. But equally, we've done that to teams ourselves this season. So I think, as fans, we just accept that it might be like that sometimes, but he has got us playing some stunning football, better than I've ever seen, I reckon.
I was going to say, it must be a very interesting fan base in the fact that because you've had so many struggles, I'm sure you appreciate what you're seeing now. But I just wondered, when you do lose 5-1 at home to Everton, and you are on such an upward trajectory and you're getting into Europe, do you still have the fans demanding more, or is it still a sense of almost feeling a bit grateful at the minute? Is there not too much pressure, but a nice level?
Yeah, you're right. It's a mix. My son, who's nearly 21, he's been going. I've been taking him since he was about 5 years old, so he's up to about 300 games himself. And he was very nervous, for example, last weekend when we played Southampton, knowing that a win will, all bar goal difference, guarantee us Europa League football, which is, I can't even begin to say how insane that sounds for Brighton to be in. But he was getting very tense and nervous, and people around me were also feeling the same. And I was actually quite calm. I think, well, I've been in far worse situations than this. So I think you have the fans which, have gone through harder times and a bit more tolerant when things don't go so well. And you have some fans who get quite upset when you lose 5-1 at home. It's not, I don't shrug it off if we lose 5-1 at home, but I know actually that this can happen sometimes in football. The best teams in the world have had thumpings sometimes, and whilst we are good at the moment, it's no big deal. We'll get through it. Some people amongst the Brighton fan base criticise the newer fans because they don't know the past struggles, but I don't think that's the right attitude to have. It should be like, come one, come all. If you want to support Brighton now, then great. The more fans you've got, fantastic. So everyone has got the right to have a view and don't have to agree with it all the time. So it's fine.
Absolutely. And have you got your sort of European destinations? Anyone you've got your eye on that you'd love Brighton to play?
Yeah. My wife said that. So yeah, you can go. I think, well, thank you very much. I think I'd like to do it. At least one away trip in the Europa League. I'll probably be asking a bit much to have the opportunity to go and watch us play AC Milan away. That would be amazing. there was a graphic release today as the potential teams which could be in next season's Europa League. And I think Brighton were put into the potential pot 3, and there's a pot 4 below. So, with all due respect, I've not actually heard of, but I did just think it's exciting. We are going to get at least 1 or 2 really decent, well-known European teams come to the Amex. And if there's an opportunity to go to an away game, then hopefully I'll have the chance to do that.
And of course, you will see names like McAllister, Matoma. Of course, they will get linked with moves this summer. Ideally they'll stay. And I'm sure, they'd be quite happy to, because obviously at Brighton, it's a progressive club. They're in Europe now. But as a fan, because of how Brighton do things, are you not so worried if they were to leave?
No, I think that's right. I'm not so worried because certainly the past couple of years, it's been proved to us when someone goes and moves on from the club, there's a plan for the next person coming in. So Yves Bissouma, who was brilliant for us the last couple of seasons, hasn't quite shown Tottenham what he can do yet because he's had a season full of injuries, but he will come good for them, I think. But I think Moises Caicedo, who effectively replaced him in that position, I think he's better. Yves Bissouma, and if Caicedo goes, whoever it might be too, I don't doubt the club has got someone else lined up. He's not going to be exactly the same, but I think someone will be there to do a good enough job. Alexis McAllister, again, was a slow burner, a couple of years with us before he started getting proper amount of decent game time, but you could see that it was coming. Had a great World Cup, had a brilliant season with us, and if he goes, I'm sure they'll find someone else to replace him. The other side of that is we've had players there for years who have shown potential in little drips and drabs, but it hasn't really come to the fore, and then had absolute blinders this season because of the style of football and the way it is worked. Solly March, for example, has been an absolute revelation. He's going to be my player this season. Others might go for you Caicedo's, perhaps, for example, or Mitoma. But having seen Solly come in as a teenager and then get to this stage now where he's, 29 years old or something, he's absolutely brilliant, and he is as good as McAllister and Caicedo have been.
Yeah, and on the flip side, in terms of transfers, the way Brighton handled this Caicedo, the talk in January when he was pushing for a move, that must be really cool as a Brighton fan to know that your club are managing the situation in such a way that a player who maybe wants out can still give you everything for the remaining 5 months of the season.
I was really surprised. I mean, I was convinced he was probably going to go midway through January. And, if that's the case, then good luck to him. Perhaps the initial information wasn't handled so well and that he put out a statement, or his agent put out a statement saying, thanks, I'm off. But then Brighton's main journalist, a chap called Andy Naylor, who I've got a lot of time for, nice guy, who's in the know about a lot of things. He was saying, no, actually, he's not going anywhere unless the club says so. And then we still another 2 weeks of all these other fans saying we're getting Caicedo, based Arsenal fans, because that's where he was probably going to go. But the club said, no, actually, he's under contract. We're keeping him. And I think that's quite impressive that the club were able to say, no, we're going to back ourselves here, keep this player, and we'll risk that he might down tools for the rest of the season. He was left out for 2 games just to get his head right, and then he's been outstanding ever since. So they handled it so well. And it is when you know that you've got those sort of processes happening at the club that is looking out for the club's best interests going forward, and we're not just going to be offloading someone just to get a quick buck.
Yeah, and just finally, Aaron, where do you see Brighton in the next 5-10 years? And are you confident that they will never need another Coca Cola Kid?
Yeah, I think probably we are. Well, that's Tony Bloom's dream, and the club's ethos with Paul Barbara to be sustainable. Tony looked after us for many, many years, and he continues to do so. But I think ultimately we want to get to a stage where we're not relying on one person to keep us going. My hopes for the next period is actually that I know we're going to have dips, especially with Europe next season. It's going to be hard, even if the club do invest with a few extra players, and I'm sure they will. But we will have dips. We may not finish 5th or 6th again next season. But if we're still competitive and still playing really decent football, I think the vast majority of fans are going to be happy with that. We're not going to be going to the next few seasons saying, well, we got to Europa League, we should be aiming for the Champions League now. We can aim for it, but I don't think we should be disappointed if we can't get there. If we do get there, that will just really be beyond the dreams. But anything can happen. Leicester won the league. No one would have seen that coming. Greece won the Euros in 2004. And I always say that one as an example. If Greece, they were, I think, the second to last ranked nation at that tournament. If a country like Greece at that time could win a major international tournament, why can't Brighton do really well in their own league? Anything can happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks a lot, Aaron, for joining us. Absolutely incredible story. And as I say, I was a teenager at the time, and I've just never forgotten it because I just remember being really jealous. You live the dream of so many fans to help your club in such an enormous way, and and I know you don't really take credit for it, but that push that money gave, it has played a part, and it must be incredible the journey you're on now.
Yeah, I'm loving it. It's been such an amazing time being a Brighton fan. My granddad first took me to a game in 1987. He passed away at the start of this season, oddly enough, in September. But he was sort of stunned as to how we'd come in that short of a period of time, and he would have absolutely loved this season because it's taken us to heights that he never saw in his lifetime. So it's been great.
Oh, thanks again, Aaron. That's Sports Quotes and Facts Untold. Stay tuned for more podcasts just about really interesting football stories like this one. Thanks a lot. See ya.